My name is Deborah Eugenia Callis, and I am a Windsor resident. I moved here over 30 years ago. I raised my biological son in the Windsor school system, and I had a foster daughter, and I raised her in part in the Windsor school system. I've been here. I purposely picked Windsor because Windsor was a place where initially I was a young mother, divorcee, trying to make a way for two children. And I looked at the taxes around and I looked at the structures around, and Windsor was the ideal place. First of all, I loved Town Hall. We had a movie theater down there, we had an ice cream parlor. There were just so many things, the farms, the structure. And I moved into a multicultural neighborhood, which is still the same. Neighbors look out for each other. We go on trips, we let other people know that we're leaving. And as a law enforcement officer, a police officer in Hartford, and living in Windsor, it was comfortable for me.
Great, thank you. And then you brought some notes on what you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. I Part of my story, I always say, success starts with the right people behind you. And those right people are your family, your friends, and you. And when I speak about family, I'm just not talking about the traditional family. I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, in a housing project that was a village. The friends that I had in the playpen, I know that's a phrase they don't use anymore, they are my friends now. I've had friends for over 60 years. I know I look good, but I have had friends for over 60 years that I grew up with. And in that village, in that project, it wasn't about being poor. It was multicultural. It was our parents came back from the war. It was new and innovative. And we went to school in our neighborhood. We walked. We came home for lunch, went back to school. But I must say that growing up in that kind of environment was just wonderful for me. If Mrs. Brown said that I did something, then Mr. Sinclair said I did something, it didn't matter. You got the same spanking. They call it a spanking, but we got disciplined. And it was a good thing. And we learned strong cultural background things. We did things in our community. We participated. And then our friends. Friends are supportive. I have friends. I have older friends that I can call on for support still, and thank God they're still living. I have younger friends that I consider sometimes my daughters. I have relationships that have been existing for a long time. I have a lot of nieces and nephews that are not my biological nieces and nephews, but they're my family. And I also say they're my family and they are my friends. We may not talk every day, but if a situation comes up, they're right there. And that's across the board. The other thing is it's you. It's what is not only poured into you, and I say that because we didn't have all of this high tech when I grew up. And everything that came to us was a story. We didn't question when I grew up. We were told when to get up, when to go to bed, what job we were going to do in the future. And just so many things in life, life lessons, and they would always end with, when you get my age, you'll understand. And I use some of those same phrases now, and I get the same expressions that I'm sure I gave. I don't get it. But I do get some of them now. I've lived long enough now to really appreciate them. So when I say you, I say that a lot of people poured in a lot of things to me. They suggested that I might go into nursing, and I might be a teacher. And I like the idea of a teacher. But when I was in the second grade, in the assembly hall, we always used to have career day speakers. And this particular day, it was the Hartford Police Department. And there was a black woman that came in to speak. Her name was Ella Brown. And Ella Brown had to be over 6 feet. I was 7. And I saw this lady, And you know, the police in those days were your friends, but nobody wanted to see a police officer at their door. And I just looked at this lady, and even now, I can see myself sitting in that little chair and looking up at this big structure of a lady. And I said, that's what I want to be when I grow up. And so as the years progressed, and my family used to say, you're going to be a nurse, or you're going to do this. And even when we went to work, I had that desire. And she lived in Hartford. So over the years, I would try to connect. And as I got older, I did connect. And I let her know that that was something I wanted to do. And she told me that she was the first black woman in the history of the Hartford Police Department. And she was hired as a policewoman. She did a fantastic job. At that time, they assigned officers to truancy that were females. It wasn't the same kind of thing that we have now. And so my dream came true. I had an opportunity to apply. I joined the Hartford Police Department in 1973. I did 27 years in the Hartford Police Department. I retired as the first black female detective. Now, and that was in the history of the 120 years. One of the things that I want to say about that is I had Ella Brown through that time, the earlier parts of my career. She worked at the community center in Hartford, and when I had my bad days, I'd go to talk to her, and she'd give me a boost, and she'd send me on my way. But for her, she didn't have that privilege. And so she was a strong supporter. She encouraged me, and it was my dream that I said I never, ever refused an engagement to talk to any group. It could be one person. Because I was 7, and she set the pathway for me. And I always say, if I can do that for somebody else, even now, I'm here. I don't mind saying I'm 75, but I want to say that I'm always willing to support people in their careers. I loved policing. I worked in every major division except vice and narcotics. When I was younger, I did some things that I didn't realize were detrimental to my life, but I did them. I had a wonderful experience with the Hartford Police Department. We stay in touch now. We have programs that are called, on Facebook, we have Now and Then. It's an invite to officers in Connecticut, with state police, their families, their friends. We get connected. We know who's the new class members that are coming in. And it's just a good feeling as a sister in brotherhood. I try to encourage and continue to encourage our new classes. I've always had a good relationship with even the Windsor Police Department. When I moved here, I had foster children at one time. And of course, they would go missing quite often. And they would be extremely helpful. And they also would support not only my family, but the families in my community. And the Windsor Police Department has always, even to this day, I see something, I see a job that they do, I'll pick up the phone, I'll call, and I'll tell the chief I don't need a response. I just want you to know that these officers were in my area. One example was we had a sick call, and the man ended up being deceased. And the officers were just so professional in supporting the family because he was mowing the lawn, and it was a scene. And they just did a wonderful job in showing empathy and sympathy. So.
Great. Thank you so much. So did you work with Ella Brown on the force at the same time?
No, she had retired, and she was working for the Hartford Police Department as not really, just a volunteer, more or less. But she worked at the Senior Citizen Center in Hartford. She was the director at one point. I did have the privilege of speaking at her funeral. I did have the privilege of requesting, and it was approved, to give her the detective badge posthumously, because she certainly did all of those roles. And all I could say was, it was just a transition. It was just a transition, but she was there for me, and I try to make sure that I'm there for all of the men and women, not just, but I encourage my sisters because I know that that's very important. You need to know that you've got somebody that's been there. Things have changed so much in policing, it's just not the same kind of a thing. But it definitely is an experience for everybody. I mean, we've had different situations. We've had what am I trying to say? Gender changes. Uh, we openly don't discriminate. There are going to be issues in any job, but it, from my experience with the Hartford Police Department, it was always engaging and always welcoming.
So when you first started, you say 1972?
73 was actually when we graduated and hit the. Oh, another unique thing. I forgot all about it. In my class, there were about 30 people. 2 were women, a Hispanic woman and myself. And we were the first women to go into patrol. We were the first women in the history of the Hartford Police Department to go into patrol.
So what did patrol mean?
Well, they trained everybody separately. The women that were the women, there were women. There were about 5 other women ahead of me. But we didn't participate in, we did all of the combat stuff, the shooting. We couldn't go swimming. There were a lot of things that were just separate. And so the 2 of us decided we wanted to try patrol. We wanted to get out there and see,
Drive
you know.
the car through the street.
Sure. I mean, we drove cars, but we were assigned originally to the juvenile division.
Okay.
That was usually sex crimes, missing persons, truancies, any of the juvenile matters. So that was the thing that we were basically assigned to originally.
And there was increased danger with patrols. Is that
No, it wasn't about the danger because the danger is, well, when you say danger, when you get up in the morning and you're doing a service job, that's really not part of your vocabulary.
right?
Because we are doing a service job. We are there to help. I can truly say I got 4 thank you notes in the 27 years that I was in the Hartford Police Department. And they meant more to me than the service that I gave. Because it's not for them to say thank you. It's for me to serve and protect. So you get up with an attitude, you kiss your family, and you say, I'll see you in the evening. You know, and you, God willing, we'll be together. But I want you to know that what I'm doing, it's what I want to do. I'm comfortable about it, and I feel fine. And so I would reinforce that with my children because they were young. My daughter, my foster daughter, she was 6 when I got her. And she had a lot of issues, and she needed to feel the comfort of knowing that mom was going to return. And my son was a typical young boy. We moved here when he was 11. So he was active, but he liked the idea of saying, Mom's a cop. So in doing all of that, I just had to let them know that that was my job. We don't think about the hazards or the risk. We just do them. And I don't think there was anything that I could think about that was a fear factor at that time. And as I learned and I developed more into policing and the training that we got, we realized that there was just a lot out there. And all of it was more or less focused at us in a sense of, because of course we were going through other things that started propping up as social issues and social justice things and our own personal, feelings. So
And when did you retire?
I retired December 31st, 1999.
All right.
And I must tell you about my retirement. I'm just so, there were other women that came on the police department after me. And we had a choice. You take a sergeant's exam, a lieutenant's exam, etc. Because I had young children and I was a single parent, and the department afforded me a lot of things I'll tell you about, but I did not choose to go up the ranks past detective. I studied for the exams, but I didn't take them. And the interesting thing with that is that the day I retired, actually the month that I retired, we had an acting woman police chief. Her name was Deborah Hawes Brown. And the day I decided to put my papers in, I went up to the chief's complex. I went upstairs and she signed me out. And actually, it was my retirement and that I was leaving. She came on after me. I stuck with her. And it was just such a good feeling to have another woman sitting on that desk that was the acting chief. And she signed me out to retire. And it was a blessing. We're still friends. Oh my goodness! And we've watched each other's children grow up. We've weddings, everything. But that empowerment to see that when I came in here, I was with just one woman, and there were close to maybe 20, 30 women when I left, and we all stayed in touch. We all are connected in some form or fashion. Yeah.
What a career.
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. I wouldn't have traded any part of it.
So what came after retirement?
What came after retirement? When I left the police department, I worked a little bit in the school system. I worked as a, yes, the Windsor school system. I worked in two areas. One as a assistant to a special needs child, and the other one was cafeteria duty. And even though I found it interesting, I just didn't feel comfortable in that position. And I think one of the main reasons was that so many things have changed. And the school system is not, even now I say it because I do have my grandson who I adopted who lives with me. But the school system to me wasn't as engaging as what I was used to when I grew up. And I grew up in a family structure. And so there were so many rules and so many regulations, so many things you could and could not do. I just didn't feel comfortable in that. And then I volunteer now with the Windsor Senior Citizen Center. I make baskets, and I come over. I used to do bingo a lot, but the pandemic kind of shut us down. Anything that they need, it's just so many things. I'll do anything. I enjoy people. I enjoy engaging with people. I like to hear other people's viewpoints, and I like to give people mine.
I bet you hear a lot.
I do. I do. I do. I really do. I really do. I really do.
Did you have anything else you wanted to talk
Well,
about? 'Cause I had-
the
I
only
could ask you questions, but, yeah.
the only thing is, I spend a lot of time reading. I spend a lot of time on social issues. I usually try to engage those kinds of things openly and sometimes privately. I usually check the Windsor calendar to see what is going on. And anything I don't know about, I always tell people I know a little bit about something, a lot of little things. But I like a lot of Desmond Tutu's works and stuff, and I always pay attention to how he talks about differences in people, and that we have to learn to respect people's differences because we'll never move on as people unless we do. We need to appreciate and value, the thoughts that they have and how they move forward in life. And not so much in order, but just take them in and think about them before we're so willing to say, no matter what the conflict, New Age thinking, anything. And the things that he says in some of his writings, he has a small book that's called Believe. And some of the things that he says are things that you have an aha moment later on in. And my sister, Maya Angelou, I always live by this example. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. And I know that that's true. And I've lived that, and I see that daily.
Yeah. that sort of, you know, reading, I mean, that must have informed your work as a police officer. You think, I don't know, what, I guess I'm interested in your thoughts about, like, sort of training like that for police departments when you were working, and now that you see, you know, with all the different
Oh,
sorts of things,
oh,
you know,
yeah.
just different kinds of,
When I came through policing, it was 95% communication.
yeah.
That's a fact.
95%.
We 95% communication. We had a radio, but it was just basically location. We had to go into situations. We had to diffuse, but we had to communicate. And now, and we made a lot of mistakes. But I believe that policing should be structured in a way that if I'm not saying that every police officer needs to live in the community that he works. I know that there are guidelines and restrictions. Sometimes they want priority should be given to people like for Hartford. If you live in Hartford and you apply, and no matter what your ethnic background is, you should be given a priority. Because I'm believing that you know that community, you're not leaving at 4 o'clock, you're socializing in that community, and you're going out with the understanding of that community. When I grew up, exactly, I grew up in the project. Do you know I can still go back to the project now and see not the people that I necessarily grew up with, but the grandchildren. And when they drop a name, I can give them a story about their grandparent. I always try to make it positive because they're grandkids. But now everything is so high tech. There's a way of doing it that is not only the social way. And what I'm mainly concerned about now in policing, and it has a lot to do with how I grew up and what I saw, we kind of knew when a person had a mental illness because we lived in a project, and it was the kind of thing that our parents would say, don't be disrespectful, or if you see this person with their shoes off, don't tease because they have a problem. Nowadays, it's we see it, but it's more agitated, and I think the pandemic has created even monumental problems. It's a hard thing for a police officer to keep people safe when they're dealing with people that have mental health issues that were suppressed maybe by medications before the pandemic, but now they've either not been able to get to doctors or they haven't had an opportunity, and they're closed in and they're refined and they're restricted. So it's a different day, and you have to make choices and decisions that to me may look inappropriate at times, but sometimes they are the right decisions. I have strong feelings about Black Lives Matter. I grew up in the civil rights era. I went to marches on Washington when I was 13. I know discrimination. New England and Connecticut, it's a little different because it's not as open and prevalent as it is in the South. But there is, I'm not going to say equally as much, but it certainly exists. It certainly exists. When we used to travel in the South during any of the civil rights issues, we knew where our place was. We knew the order of things. But people still use yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. Despite the fact that they may not serve you at a lunch counter, that my experiences were, it was, ma'am, you have to take your children out of here. So, I say all that to say this. I am an activist. I still am. I do respect people's views and viewpoints. For my people, I support them. I have seen police situations that I think were definitely inappropriate. I've seen situations, I can't even begin to talk about George Floyd because that's universal, but there are so many situations. I think we as a nation cried over that more than anything that I can think of in my life because a blind person would have cried over it. It's just a fact. But I have seen other things that police officers were justified in shooting, not that it wasn't as painful, but because that window that you have to make a decision was the decision that you made. And that's why we have court systems, and that's why we have other institutions that try to help you through that. But I have seen things that have been extremely painful, but it hasn't changed my mind about people. And I just spend my time trying to educate and make people understand that this happened because. But it doesn't mean it's not as painful to me as it should be, because I grew up through all of that. I grew up through civil rights, and I grew up seeing my presidents and presidential candidates shot down and killed, and my leaders, my black leaders that I grew up with, shot down. And it was hard for me because when I lived in a project, we went to school in our neighborhood, we went to church in our neighborhood right on Main Street. I was in the church that I grew up in 50 years. Now I'm in the other church down the street. But I come into Hartford every day. It's my community. I go in sometime to get food, other times I go in for church, other times, a funeral or whatever have you. But that's the community I grew up in. This is the community I moved in to raise my kids, and I'm so grateful that I did that. But my kids, including my son, can go into Hartford because he has more of me in him too, and do well and not worry about people shooting. He's a father, he's married, and he has his own son who's 9. And he takes him in and he rebirths all of the situations. This is where I got my first spanking or whatever. But we stay connected. It's my Windsor and my Hartford.
Still go to church
And
in Hartford?
oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. I actually now I'm working on the Ida B. Wells board. I'm on the board of directors down there. And Ida B. Wells, she was a journalist, a black woman, who sued the Supreme Court and got $500 that she never collected. But that's just one of the stories. There's so many, and mainly because she wasn't the first Rosa Parks. She was on a train, and they kicked her off. But anyway, our church, along with HUD, has a housing unit on Coventry and Tower Avenue. It's called Ida B. Wells. So the people that live there are senior citizens, my age, and my purpose for taking that is during the pandemic, I just prayed to God that he would show me something that I could do that was positive. And it led me in that direction. Since I was out of the church, I got involved because I said, what are these seniors doing now that they don't have anything? So my hope is, and I'm working on it now, and we're putting it together, that a couple of times a month I go down, I bring my sewing machine, and I help them sew that dress that they want to keep, but their kids have bought them a couple of new ones, but they like that old one, and the pocket's hanging off. So I want them to be happy. Or they can't mix a mix anymore, a cake mix. And so bring it down to the community room. I'll mix it for you. Now you take it back up to your apartment and cook it. Little things or they can't open the pill bottles, or they need somebody to advocate about the lights and the rent, or they get a letter from management and they get all upset because now if I say something, I've got to move. So that's my calling now, and that's the newest thing that I've done. Before that, I did pillowcase dresses for the kids in Haiti. I would make those. And during the pandemic, I made over 800 masks for our church to disseminate. And we'd give them out. We have a food program. So every week I'd make 150 or more, and then I would bring them down during the food program. And I had an experience during the pandemic one day. I was driving to the church, and I saw a lady coming out of one of the streets, and she had two children. And one of the kids had my mask on. I stopped the car and I waited until she had a stroller and I said, Miss, I said, I like that mask. Where did you get it? So she said, oh, I got it at the church up there. I said, it is beautiful. I said, have you got any more? So she said, well, what happened was they gave me 3, but they were too tight for me, but they fit my kids. I couldn't tell her I made them, but it was just like the thank yous that I was. Oh, honestly, I almost melted, and so I pulled up a little bit to cry, and it was fantastic seeing your work, And that was a time when we couldn't get masks. We got all kinds of masks now, but I mean, I sewed until my machine broke, and then I got it fixed. And I'm still, the projects that I'm working on now are, I'm trying to figure out something for the seniors. So it's more or less doing squares to see how we're going to do quilting. So it's that kind of thing.
Well, I see why you talked to Joyce Peoples for
4 hours.
yesterday, because I have so much.
No, not yesterday.
Or
Many,
when,
many days.
Yeah,
No, I'm sorry, but
I
the
have
first
so
time
many-
she called me. Oh, yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
could ask you there's so many different
I know,
topics
I
I
know.
want to ask you about. I want to make sure that you're
I'm
got
fine.
where to go. Okay.
I'm fine. I'll talk as long as you talk. You and you and you.
I have, it's kind of like a two-parter.
Good.
For coming from Hartford to Windsor, if you don't mind sharing about how many years living in Windsor, what's your favorite part about Windsor, any event, anything.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I moved here. You do the math. Let me see. I'm trying to think. My son he had just finished elementary school. So he was going to Sage Park. And so I was seeking housing. And so I decided that it was between Bloomfield and Windsor. What drew me to Windsor was Town Hall, to be honest with you, in that area. Geisler's. Oh my gosh. And the movie theater. Because even in Hartford, we'd come into Windsor. I love the structure around Town Hall, the library. I just like that feeling, the waterfall, all of that stuff. So when I started looking, I just liked that kind of, I don't want to say little house, because that Opie type of atmosphere, I guess. I don't know. But I wanted also easy access, and that was a big plus. So for me, I'm almost parallel to this area right here. I live actually over there. So I get on the highway, and it was 2 exits down to go to work. I would go north, and I would drop my daughter up at daycare, which was right across from the Windsor Police Department at the time, which I was really happy about, because I figured if there was an emergency, someone over there would go get my child. So I liked the location of the police department. At that time, Northwest Park was just fantastic for me with children. There were so many parks. Everywhere I went, and I like that because we have community areas for play. They may some of them, a lot of them need structure and new equipment. But for us, my kids could walk from my house over here. And they could use the tennis courts, and then they had the open field. It wasn't as beautiful as it is now. And then they had the cut through where their friends were over that way. And plus, on my side, they could go to the Pine Grove area, cut through, and go up to, I'm trying to think what the store was, Kmart, I think, at the time. The shopping center, all of that was here. And the water, we could always find some. And Bart's, and it was just, Saturday we're going to go get hot dog at Bart's and go to the park area. And so it was a lot. And the town was engaging. We had actually, the people that live on my street now are grandchildren and children of the people that lived there when I moved. And that's amazing. My community has still been multicultural. Sometimes we have a black family move out, a Hispanic family would move in, or a white family. We have never had, in the units that I live off of Rood, never a development area where it's 8 or 9 blacks in one area, or 8 or 9 Hispanics, or 8 or 9 whites. Each individual house had a different cultural breakdown, and that was the best part about it. And we looked out for each other. Now, next door to me now, I have a Hispanic family, and their kids think nothing of mowing my grass. I tell them, I can do it. Or shoveling me out, and it's always, now, Mommy, I'm going to do this. Or I can't explain it. I mean, it's not only their culture to take care of older people, but they see the responsibility and seeing that we all are uniformly looking good. If somebody's grass isn't cut after a week or so, I may say, or someone else may say, is your lawnmower working? Do you need help? And it's just wonderful. I just love it. I just love my community. I love the people that are over there. And we share, and the former police chief, he was extremely engaging. I don't know this one.
The police chief now is Don Melanson, and
I can't think of his name. I know.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
And he had kids in the system.
Yeah.
And he would do things like, he'd be at the high school. And Mark Francis and all those guys that are retired, they would bring our kids home. You see that cruiser like, what in the world? But it wasn't that they were in trouble. My son would get out, Ma, I didn't do anything. He's just giving me a ride home.
Yeah.
But the police chief, he'd be at food share. He'd be directing traffic. And this police chief, I've left him messages, but I've never had any issue.
Yeah.
Like I say, I love our police department and fire and all of that. And I love our volunteer fire department, I must say, because I had an issue where my sister's smoked. She was away on vacation, and the smoke detector went off, and I was like, I don't want to call. So I looked around, and I couldn't determine anything, so I said, let me call the fire department. They came out, big production. And what it was she had an old detector that was past the 10-year or more, and you couldn't shut it off because, for one thing, they took it off and replaced the batteries, but this was a slide off, and you had to actually dispose of the whole thing. So they hooked us up with the Red Cross, and she got free. They came out and they put up all it. And so service-wise, I must say Windsor does well. It really is. It does well. And I love the mayor's approach. I do have an affiliation with a party, but I can't think of any connections that I've made that I need, beyond the mayor, that any particular party didn't look into. Let me say it like that. And the mayor, of course, he's around. You got a problem, you just go down to bars.
Yep.
So it's that kind of thing. And when we had the light out, it's been a while, but I always think of this time of year because that's when we had that snow during October. This center was fantastic. I mean, they started out just giving one meal, and you could charge your phones, and you could sleep in the gym. After that, we ended up being a community. We didn't even want to leave. We were getting breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There were dogs in there. You could go in there and take a shower. It was just unbelievable. And I couldn't stop letting them know how much we appreciated things because they were there for us. And every service that there was, they did a fantastic job. It was a week, I think, we were without power. But for us, and I had a dog at the time, it was good. It was the town took care of its people. I think we even made a little Connecticut history. I think because I remember a few of the Congress people coming over and talking about what we did as an excellent job. But I think we as Windsorites, we do. We stick together. We support each other, and I love being a senior. The engagement we have at the center. Don't let us find out that somebody's sick or they need something. Everybody's right on point. So,
You know, it strikes me that you have a philosophy of living that's the cup is half full, as opposed to the cup half empty.
exactly.
You see positive.
But my parents spoke positivity. My father did 2 branches of the service. He was a cook. And so he got out of the Army. He cooked for the Navy. And that was, a good lifestyle. My mother, she stayed all of her life, and she worked up at Sikorsky, not Sikorsky, Hamilton Standard at the time. And before that, she worked in laundry. And so they always spoke positively. My parents, we lived in the project, but our parents used to take us to New York on the weekend or get in the car and go to Philadelphia. And we would do things as kids like go to the Cotton Club. And while they were doing the afternoon sets and practicing, anybody could come in. You kids had to be behaved, but we knew better because it wasn't a spanking those days, it was a beating. So we go and we sit on the side and they rehearse for the night. And then at night, there would be the older teenagers, which were maybe 20. They would stay in the hotel room that they got for the weekend or that day, usually Saturday night. And they would go to the Cotton Club to the actual show. Or we go to the Empire State Building. My mother would take us to a museum. Or we go to Philly where my grandmother was. And we go to the Philadelphia Zoo. We go to the Bronx Zoo. They exposed us to a life like you just wouldn't believe because all you had was family stuff. So we went everywhere. And my parents' philosophy was, at home you can jump on the furniture, you can do whatever. But when I give you that look, you better straighten up. I remember my mother ushering in church and I'm back there talking. And all of a sudden I saw her rise up and look forward. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get killed. Not when I get home, but in this ladies' room here at the church. So, I thank God for my parents bringing me by way of the church and by way of understanding people. My father was born in the South, and my mother, but he had a terrible experience in the South. But
What was it?
okay, it was a racial incident, and his brother was killed by a white man. So he and his brother went and picked up his brother and brought him home. And back in those days, the funeral people came when the funeral people came. And so he came home, he packed up his stuff, and he literally walked out of the South. And he never went back. He came up here, he joined the service, he stayed at Westover after, he got out of one branch and went into the other. But he didn't go back for even his mother's funeral or brothers. He never. He was bitter, but my mother, on the other hand, wouldn't allow him to spew his venom, So he would say certain things, but my mother always would diffuse it. And he would respect that. But now, as I know, he couldn't have survived now because it would have been just too painful that things are still going on. But it was just part of how we were brought up and how we were we were poor, but I went to an all-Jewish camp, Camp Iapo in Somers, Connecticut, when I grew up. You better not say that.
I've been there.
You better not say that.
I've been there.
Isn't it fantastic?
Yes.
You better look at me. I not only went to that camp all of those years, I ended up being the arts and craft director. I ended up, I ended up leaving that camp. I have a friend who's 90 something. She was my camp counselor. Her name is Polly. Her name was Polly Updegraff, but now her name is Polly Champ. Just about 3 weeks ago, I went to her husband's funeral. He was 94. Well, when I walked in there, those people thought they couldn't figure out what the heck was wrong with us because I walk in and she sees me coming. Now, the funeral now, he laying out there, you know. And she's, oh, Deborah, I didn't want you coming. Oh, my God. I'm like, I'm going to be here for you. You're my girl, you know. She was my camp counselor. That's how I hold on to people. I haven't called her, and I called her. I texted her, and I said, I'm going to get back with you, but I know you got a lot of paperwork and all that stuff to do, so now I'm not going to get back to you. But I went to Camp Iapo, and you know how beautiful the landscape is up there and everything. And Avery, I lived in the project, I'm telling you. And that was our way out. You know, we weren't rich. You know, we had stuff. But I probably went on scholarship, I'm thinking now, you know, as I'm older. But I was the only black kid. And I used to, yeah, my sister went. My sister went. And the white kids, we would get our hair wet and they would get all nappy. And they were like, but then when we go home, you know, we get it straightened. Go back. And so culturally, I've even had those friends. Ezra Melrose, he used to be the principal at Weaver. His daughter and I went to camp together. We were friends for years after that. And I know so many people, but yeah, Camp Iapo was my place.
Yeah, I got some stories about that.
It was Camp Iapo. Yep. I'm trying to think of well, the cabins probably are still the same.
I went down there a few years back, probably a year or two, and
That's funny.
There's no buildings. The town decided to make it into like kind of like preserved space, like just a regular.
Oh, for camping and all that.
Well, it's just like a park, like you look at it, like the mess hall's not there, the office is.
And you know
there.
that was a man-made lake.
Yeah.
Is that still there?
The lake there is still there. I've seen people like go fishing
and
there,
stuff.
swimming. It's just that you don't have the Camp Iapo part.
And you know that winding road. Oh, that was a trip. And we used to walk from camp all the way down to the center of town to Summers. So you know I have some connections out there too. Yeah.
Yeah. Long story short, lived in Hartford till like 1999. Moved here to Windsor, and my mom wanted me to get me to do stuff. So that was the first thing she looked
Camp
up.
Iapo.
And I remember going there, and it was like at the time it was day camp. And then
right,
by the end of the summer, they allowed you to like spend a week to camp there, which I've done.
See, originally when I was going there, it was overnight camp for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Then they lost money, you know, in the overnight camp experience, and so they started the day camp.
Yeah.
And it was all girls when I went to camp there.
Yeah.
That was another thing.
Yeah, and when I was going there, it was like a mix, boys and girls from probably like pre-K to like high school.
Oh wow!
So I remember the camp director Chris, and being in one of the groups, I was looking where
this is so.
I was looking down where the young kids are, and I seen this guy wear like a back brace because his body was deformed in a way, and at like being a kid from Hartford, like I had that little snootiness, like why
you
he's
better be
looking
tough.
like that, and that's what my mom wanted me to get the Hartford out of me.
I got it.
So,
That's survival mode.
Yeah, so I'm like looking at this guy like why he's looking so weird. Years later, I go to my church, I see him again with his parents, and then I'm like, did you work at Camp Idaho? And he said yes. And
Oh
we became
my
the
gosh.
bestest friends, and yeah.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, a lot of life connections.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I mean you're talking about 75 years now. You're not talking about 16. But like I say, it's a way of life. I just love. I appreciate so much of what my parents instilled in me. Um, I I think as I get older now, I always say now I'm living with reality. I always say that I go to the doctor and I say, well, he says, how are you feeling? I said, okay, this week I'm hurting from head to toe. He said, in reality, we got to be this way. You're moving into transition. When you were younger, you could get up and wash the clothes and the cabinets and the floor all in one day. That may take you 2 weeks to do now. You do one project. Because if I'm busy doing things with my arms, they don't hurt. The minute I stop, they ache. I had a knee replacement. It didn't go so well. So some days I'm without the cane and other days I am. But now that I've lived long enough, I'm in transition. I feel a different kind of a way. I'm more, I guess, in a peaceful way. Like when my kids call, they're like, Ma. I said, listen, I'm on my way out. I'll call you back, or I'll call you as soon as I can get settled. That's to diffuse them because I don't want to hear it. And by the time I call them back, oh, I'm okay. Yeah, you figured it out. So I'm trying to let them know that I am in transition because I'm not going to be there. The blessing that I have is I have my daughter had a baby, and she's had a lot of issues. So she stayed with me while she was pregnant. And she had a domestic case with a boyfriend and had a restraining order. So before she had the baby, I made it clear to her that he was not welcome in our household unless I was there. So she has the baby, and the second day she calls me up and tells me that she's not coming back. She's not this, she's not that. And if he can't come, I'm not coming. And you can come and get the baby. So, knowing her history, I said, God, I'm not ready for this. I have an empty nest, and I've had one for a while. I'm busy. But if this is the way it's going to be, this is what's going to happen. So I went and got him at 2 days old. She's not with Mr. Wonderful anymore, of course. And she went on and did her thing. But when I had this baby and brought him home, I can't tell you the people that my friends just were like, you gonna do this? I said, gotta do it. Can't leave him out there. He's my grandson too. I raised hers from 6. So the long and the short of things, I got him. They rallied. They gave me everything I needed. I got things from everybody, Glastonbury, Simsbury, anywhere I called, because I connect, there were people that helped me. 6 months into him, one day I was talking to one of my girlfriends. I said, something wrong. So I said, I think I'm going to have to take him to the hospital. So I take him to the hospital, and immediately being a police officer, I knew how that would go. They put me in a room and busily took care of him. I didn't say anything because I knew. Hours and hours of exams and everything. Long and the short of thing, they called in a specialist. And what he had was Hirschsprung's disease, which is a disease that during the first and second trimester, your inner organs don't develop well enough. And your lower intestines, his lower intestines was like a mesh. But as he was getting older, he was taking more intake in, but he wasn't able to expel as much as he could take in. So what was happening to him that day was he was poisoning his system. And had I have waited even an hour more, he might have died because it was spreading through his system. And they could see that by the fever when they got him there. And of course, when they got him there, they started giving him medications to make sure he was well. He got well enough to go home to know that he had to have surgery within 4 months. So he did have that surgery. They call it a pull through. They pulled out all of the raggedy intestines and they built a new structural ball around his lower intestines. And I had to learn how to strengthen those muscles for him. I don't remember any of that, and he didn't either. But it was a process. But now I know that God put me in that situation and put him in that situation for a reason. And so he started showing other developmental signs, and the long and the short of things, he's a child with autism. So I adopted him at 2. I changed his name. He's been in the Windsor school system, which is very good because I advocate for him. But he's a talking child with autism. And he's a male, which is kind of unusual because some of the males usually don't talk if they have autism. But the blessing in all of this is, while I was watching him develop through birth to 3, I noticed there were certain things that were going wrong. So I knew he would always have some part of special needs. So what I did was I would always say to him, look at me, look at me. I want you to do such and such and such. Or when he'd get distracted, I'd say, look at me. I did not know that kids with autism don't eye view you. So he was always a kid that viewed. So he picked up an emotional study. So he can look at you and tell that you're sad, masks or no mask. He can look at you and tell that you're anxious. He could look at me and tell that I'm angry. He'd get off the bus and he would look at me like, did the school call you today? And he even does that now. But now he does it routinely. So,
You've given him emotional
because,
knowledge that
yes.
he wouldn't have had.
And what happened is, because he has so many different changes from a normal kid with autism, because they all are all over the spectrum. And there are a lot of kids that are autistic now. I probably was too when I was growing up. But they didn't categorize it. But I know I'm dyslexic in some forms. I circumvent numbers and read. That's why I love the new technology to correct me. But all of that, I say that to say all of this. He's now 9, but I prepare him. I'm his Gigi. He knows that I'm going to transition and go to heaven, and that other people, my son, is going to raise him. And we don't speak on it on a daily basis, but I just remind him that kind of transition is going to take place. So that even with the autism, and he will, you tell him something, he'll get, I say, some people have a funeral. He's on YouTube, seeing how a funeral works. You tell him that a drain, he hears things like that sound. He doesn't like a bouncy house because the motor, the sensitivity of it. We're in a store sometimes and he'll say, what's that? And it's the freezer. I don't hear anything. He's very sensitive to sound, smoke detectors, any of that kind of stuff. He'll freak out and stuff like that. But he's doing well in the system. They can do better. I think that he reads, but he doesn't read to understand. So he's going to be a child that has to be taught through visual learning. That he can read all the words on the page, but it doesn't mean anything to him. So, and I have to do that sometimes. I get the audio part before the reading part. But I can understand them both, but it takes me a little longer. Like I may read a chapter and put it down and don't even know what I read.
That's
So,
what YouTube
it's beautiful.
can
It shows
show
you
things that
everything. He gets on there, sometimes I hear him in there, how to make magnets and how does a drain work. The other day he was in there looking to see, because he looks at the commercials and the one with the air filters cleaning out the ducts.
Yeah.
He wanted to know how you clean out ducts. And I heard him in the room and he had that on YouTube. And so anything, how helium works. He knows everything about his surgery. He loves body organs and all that. He asked me the other day how a baby was born. I said to myself, okay. So I told him kind of the basics. And then I said, would you like to see it on the screen? And so one of my girlfriends said, that might be too much. I put it on YouTube. He was fine with it. He went on about his business and didn't ask how they're made. He just he just wanted to know how a baby was born. So I dealt with it. I dealt with that, and so it was great. It was great. Oh, we might have some people. So
So your family still lives, your son still lives
no, my son lives in Middletown, Connecticut.
Middletown? Well, close.
He lives in Middletown. My daughter stays in transit, but she calls. She calls, and I help her with whatever she, she's still my daughter. She's gonna be my daughter, and I love it. I just do what I can do, and but they come here. They come. My son's coming today and tomorrow because some. So I'm out.
I think you're.
I'm.
I hate for it to end.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
What a pleasure.
Listen, I'll offer myself up. I will anytime.
You're a good storyteller. Yes.
Yes, I will at any time be available to talk about anything that we want to talk about.
It's Deborah, right?
Deborah.
Deborah,
Yeah.
this is